Pass it over to Javier to talk about our translation service help, and then we'll kick it off to do our introductions, and then we'll introduce our guest speaker for the day. Take it away, Javier.
Thank you, Justin. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having lunch while enjoying the webinar, so that is fantastic. I am going to give instructions regarding the interpretation. I will say the same in Spanish in a couple of sentences. So basically, at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see a globe when Justin activates interpretation. When you see the globe, go down to the globe and select your favorite language. It can be either Spanish or English in this meeting. I am going to announce the same in Spanish right now. Buenas tardes a todos, espero que estén teniendo un muy buen almuerzo mientras aprendemos en este webinario. Y quiero que sepan que va a haber interpretación. Cuando Justin active la interpretación, van a ver un globo terráqueo al calce de la pantalla, presionan en el globo terráqueo y eligen su idioma favorito. Puede ser español o inglés. Si están en el teléfono, vayan a los 3 puntitos y en los 3 puntitos eligen el lenguaje. Asegúrense de apagar el idioma original, así no tienen tanta mezcla de idiomas en la misma comunicación. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Justin. Please activate interpretation. Thank you.
And remember, everyone, for those that want it in English, switch to English. And of course, those who need the interpretation in Spanish, switch to Spanish. And again, from the Zoom features, it's the globe, and you'll move over from there. Okay, great. So I'm gonna, without any further ado, just kind of go over a high level of our day today. It's gonna be a really exciting Zoom today. We're gonna be talking about our breaking down the ballot of our state ballot propositions. How many of us, just by a show of hands of those of us who are on the screen, are like, what is on this ballot or what is on our ballot around state propositions? I know I have. There's a lot of us who maybe have received a lot of ads and a lot of different stuff around that. And we want to be able to provide a high level covering of, what it means to understand a yes vote or a no vote for them. So we're going to be able to talk about that today. We have a great friend of ours from the League of Women Voters to come and talk about it. And going to be able to share that right now. All right, great. So again, this is breaking down the ballot. I will introduce British very shortly, but I do want to get into some quick housekeeping that I'll pass it to Jacqueline to speak to us about. So go ahead and take it away, Jacqueline.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Just a few agreements for our Zoom so that we can have a productive time with British today. If you have questions, please use the chat function. We might take a few minutes to respond, but we will review your questions before the webinar ends. If you get disconnected, just log back in. We'll let you in. We are recording the session, and we will send this out to everybody who has signed up for today, either tomorrow or Friday, so you can share it with folks, you can review. So if you miss anything, you will get a repeat of this. There are no breaks scheduled. It should just be an hour. So eat, drink, however you can. Just stay muted, if you will, but do what you need to. And again, this will be recorded. So if you have to step away, you can rewatch it. And finally, it's election year. It means we are all passionate about our opinions. We have a lot of feelings, which is around this campaign, this election, which is why we're here. So I just want to remind everybody that this is a neutral zone. This is a nonpartisan look at the ballot measures. So this is also a nonpartisan space, which means, if we see anything in the chat that says, I can't wait to vote for so-and-so, or this ballot is what I've been waiting to vote for, we will just be removing any comments like that, just so we can maintain neutrality and we can keep the focus on what British is telling us, so that everybody can really spend their time absorbing that information, and you know, take home the information that you get so you can make an informed decision on your own. So thank you for understanding that. Thank you for supporting this, and we're ready to get started. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And just before I introduce British, I want to be able to talk about, you know, what what's going to be covered today. We're going to talk about, you know, again, the propositions, but also we're going to give a community voices overview because we know there's some folks here that may not be aware of community voices. And we want you all to sign up and be a part of our membership, you know, and we'll get into that later. But without any further ado, I want to introduce British, who's going to be able to talk to us about breaking down the ballot of our state proposition. So go ahead and take it away, British.
Good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you for having me here. So my name is British Waja. I know you probably see that last name and said, how do I pronounce it? So that is how I pronounce my last name. And yes, I am here with the League of Women Voters. Just to give you a quick intro on myself, because we don't have a lot of time to get through all of these propositions. I've been with the League since around 2019, and I initially joined because of this forum, right? We were doing pros and cons, and I attended their session at a local library, and I just really appreciated the resource. So I'm hoping that everyone here today finds this beneficial and finds the information helpful. And we're really here to just help you make an informed decision about the ballot propositions. And we have 10 propositions on the ballot today. And as it was mentioned earlier, this is going to be an unbiased, nonpartisan explanation of the ballot measures. And we know that the League wears many hats, right? But in this aspect, we're here for voter education. And so we're going to go through those 10 statewide ballots today. We will not have time to go through the county or the city ballots. So I just encourage you to kind of read up on those on your own. And so if it feels like I'm moving a little fast, it's because I want to get through everything. Please put your questions in the chat. And what we'll do is at the end of each ballot measure, we'll follow up to see if there's any questions that we need to answer. And this is primarily because I cannot see if anybody is raising their hand on the screen. I cannot see any of that because I'm going through the presentation. So thank you for your patience on that. And so a couple of things I do want to point out before we get into each individual proposition. With these 10 ballot measures, all of them have to pass with a majority vote of 50% plus one. Now, what that means is they're going to look at 50% of all ballots that were completed. It's not going to be based on the number of people that voted for that particular proposition. And so you may decide that a certain proposition you're indifferent, you don't have an opinion on, you choose not to vote if you like. But with that, your ballot itself will still count towards what the total number they need to get the majority vote. In addition, there are 5 propositions that have been put on by state legislature. So that is going to be highlighted on each of the slides that we cover. And the remaining propositions were placed on the ballot by signature gatherers. So an organization collected enough signatures from the public in order to have the ballot measure placed on this year's ballot. Okay. And so just want to make sure everybody has that information. And now we're going to get into the first proposition, which is Prop 2. And this is a bond for public school and community college facilities. So currently, California has about 80 billion in bond debt, and they have about another 35 billion that's unsold. The state pays about 6 billion a year from the general fund to repay these bonds. And that covers about 3% of the annual general fund revenue. For this particular proposition, it will authorize additional bonds for public school and community college facilities. Again, this was put on by state legislature. And what we're asking you is, should the state authorize 10 billion in bonds to build new or renovate existing public school and community college facilities? If this sounds familiar to you, that is because there was Prop 13 back in 2020 that asked if the state could sell 15 billion in bonds, but that did not pass. And so some of the differences between what was on the proposition last time versus this time is it's a little more targeted this year in terms of the community college aspect, because it focuses solely on community colleges, whereas in the last bond, it did include the Cal State and UC facilities. And so I do want to point, I don't know, I meant to call this out, but I don't know if everyone has this book, this general election book. This is like my first primary resource in addition to any information that the league provides. But the reason I am calling that out is because there's certain breakdowns on where the funds will go. And I could not incorporate all of that on the slide again due to timing. But essentially what would happen with this bond is about 8.5 million would go towards public school facilities. And then 4 million of that would cover the renovation of existing buildings. Another 3.3 would go towards new construction. And then you have about 600,000 for career tech education, another 600,000 for charter schools. And then there will be 1.5 million for community college facilities. And so the text of this proposition goes into more specificity, and it allocates specific amounts for lead remediation. And one thing to call out is this total bond of 10 billion also accounts for applications that have already been received by the state. And so there is an applications received beyond bond authority list already out there. And currently about 1.3 billion has already been applied for the new construction portion of this bond. And about 2.5 billion has already been applied for the renovation of existing buildings. So that's public information that you could go to. There's a website and it lists out which schools are on that list and kind of what their request is for. And so I do want to call out that we're already looking at around 3.8 billion that has been applied for of that 10 billion. And when we look at the overall fiscal impact of this bond, we're saying that the state would have to spend about 500 million a year over the next 35 years to repay this bond and make sure that all of the enhancements are being made. And overall, we're all pretty familiar with the condition of a lot of the public school and community college facilities, the repairs that are needed to the classrooms and the buildings themselves. And while the state government does raise money to help build and repair facilities, they're doing this through selling this bond, right? So they're issuing debt in order to have the money now, and then they repay the debt in the form of interest, and that's that 500 million. So for Prop 2, other thing I want to caveat on this presentation, when we talk about what supporters say and opponents say, these are opinions of certain individuals, right? Similar to what we see in the books that are provided by the state. So this is not necessarily factually based information. And when we look at the amount raised that's included on each slide, that information was pulled from the Secretary of State's website, and I have it as of October 1st. And so when we look at what supporters say for this, it's that the bond will pay for badly needed repairs and security improvements and improving and making the facility safer. And there's been about 5.7 million raised in favor of this. Opponents say that it makes taxpayers pay bond interest over many years, and the money will go to wasteful construction projects instead of classroom instruction, but no money's been raised in opposition of that. And so, again, we're asking, if you say yes, that means you want the state to issue a 10 million bond in order to support school facility repairs. And if you say no, you do not want the state to issue that bond. That is Prop 2. So I'm going to go back to the screen and pause for a second to see if there were any questions on Prop 2.
And I think just for a flow of the presentation, maybe if we can have folks put it in the chat, and maybe you can go through the full list and then, kind of answer questions at the end.
Versus going through questions after each prop.
Yeah, just so we can make sure we could get them all.
Okay. I'm going to
Okay.
do my best. If there's a lot of questions in the chat, they will not all get answered. I'm telling you now.
Yeah. I was gonna say it might be good because we're still on the prop, so we
Yeah.
don't lose steam. But we do have
Yeah.
a question. It says, are they
Oh.
going to disperse funds based on a need priority? I don't know if you would be aware of that.
You know, I don't know if I saw any specific information that spoke to the priority of what and how it would be dispersed outside of that one application source that I cited where it says, hey, this is money that had already been applied for. And so what it did say is for applications that were submitted prior to October 31st, those would be funded first. Outside of that, there was no other information regarding how the priority will be determined for the applications and the money and how it will be applied. Why do opponents of Prop 2 say these construction projects are wasteful? Primarily based on the opinion that we have is, do we need to update facilities or do we need to improve education system overall? And they're looking at wasteful from that standpoint, right? Is where is the money actually going in terms of how it's being funded? To be clear, if it passes, the fund must be repaid. Where will the repayment money come from? So this is when people are saying taxpayers. Whenever the state issues a bond, right, it's similar to an individual obtaining a mortgage. You're getting the money up front. The state will get the money up front for this bond. And basically you have investors, right? They sell this bond. The investors are expecting the interest income from that bond. So we get the 10 million, and that's that, we get the 10 billion. The 500 million that we have to pay out from the general fund is going to go back to those investors. Now, how that 500 million gets paid back and what the general fund is, the general fund is the money that the state collects for all different purposes. So that comes from taxpayer dollars, taxes that, sales tax. So everything that the state collects goes into this general fund. This bond itself would not cause an increase in your taxes per se, but it would provide an additional source of where the tax funds will go, right? So when you hear things about a budget shortfall, budget deficits, it's because these are requirements for payouts that we have. And our total income from a tax perspective is this. So that when we talk about the general fund, taxpayer dollars are used to repay money if it's coming out of the general fund, but it does not necessarily mean that your taxes are going to increase. So in this instance, it's not a tax increase. It just changes where the taxpayer money is going. Hopefully that answers the question for you, Lorna. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to prop. Oh, give me a second. All right, we're going to move on to prop 3. And this one is the guarantee marriage equality proposition. And what it will do is ensure the constitutional right to marriage. Again, this is a legislative amendment put on by the state legislature. And the question is, should the California Constitution be amended to define mortgage as a fundamental right for all, regardless of sex or race, and remove language that states that marriage is only between a man and a woman? And again, I'm going to say, if you have your official voter information guide and you go to page 75 of that guide, it is very clear what the changes are. And so previously, the constitutional article stated that only a man and a woman is considered valid or recognized in California for marriage purposes. And what would happen if this proposition passes is it would be amended to state that marriage is a fundamental right, and it's a furtherance of our inalienable rights for life, liberty, and the rights to due process and equal protection. So essentially what this proposition is doing is updating our state constitution to align with what current actions are. And as we all know, that California does now allow same-sex marriages to be performed. And so we're just updating our constitution to match our current actions. So as a result, doesn't have any fiscal effects because it really is an update in language. Now, supporters of this say that the California Constitution should affirm marriage equality, which is the law of the United States, and Prop 3 protects the fundamental right to marriage regardless of gender or race. There's been about 3 million raised for that. And opponents say that same-sex marriage is already legal, so there's no need to change California's constitution, and that it also removes all rules for marriage, opening the door to child marriages, incest, and polygamy. No money has been raised for that. And so that is it for Prop 3. I really encourage you, if you have the voter information guide, to just go to page 75. You will see how simple the language has been updated to reflect what our current actions are. And so if you vote yes for this, you're saying you agree with updating the California Constitution to reflect what our current laws, which allow same-sex marriage. If you're saying no, you do not want the California Constitution to be updated. And that is Prop 3. So let me see if there are any questions. Let's see, it's in the chat.
And British, I take back what I said. If we need to keep moving, it's okay, because we realize we might be tight on time.
Okay. All right, so we are going to move on to Prop 4. So Prop 4 is a bond for safe drinking water, wildfire prevention, and climate programs. This would authorize a bond for safe drinking water, wildlife prevention, etc. Again, this was put on by the state legislature. And the question that we're asking again is, should the state sell a $10 billion bond for various projects to reduce climate risks and impacts? And so we're thinking about the impact of climate change in the state of California, and also how it impacts low-income communities. Now,
British, I'm so sorry to cut you off. We can't see your slides.
Oh, crap. Okay, hold on.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. Did I stop sharing? Let me see. Yep, I did. I stopped sharing. Thank you. All right. Okay. So for this proposal, again, the state will be selling $10 billion in bonds related to these specific projects. And in this instance, it will prioritize projects that benefit disadvantaged communities. It could reduce local costs for natural resources and climate activities, primarily because the state bond will be providing support for those, thereby reducing the local cost impact. Now, within this proposition, at least 40% of the total funds allocated for projects is going to be allocated for projects that provide meaningful and direct benefits to vulnerable populations and disadvantaged communities. I'm using quotation marks because that is a specifically defined term as part of the proposition, and that is one of the reasons the focus of the proposition calls out low-income families or disadvantaged communities, because a certain portion of the money has to be used towards those communities. Okay, and so with this, it would help support water, wildfire, coastal resilience, fish, wildlife, clean air, and it would also help to mitigate extreme heat. Now, in this instance, the state would pay about $400 million annually for 40 years to repay the bond. Okay, and again, just keep in mind that there is a requirement for a certain percentage to go towards vulnerable populations or disadvantaged communities. And that is pretty much Prop 4. So supporters say it will help protect our communities, health, and the economy. There's been about 5.4 million raised. And opponents say that bonds are the most expensive way to fund government spending and should not be used. And Prop 4 provides funding for unproven technologies with no real evidence of success. Okay, so that's Prop 4. You can put your questions in the chat. I'll keep going to Prop 5. All right. Prop 5 is lower voter approval requirements for local housing and infrastructure. And this would allow local bonds for affordable housing and public infrastructure with a 55% voter approval. This was put on by the state legislature. And what the question is should local bond measures, excuse the typo, to fund housing bonds for low and middle income Californians and public infrastructure projects be allowed to pass with 55% voter approval instead of the current 66.7% approval. Okay, so just so we have some background on this, we know housing is expensive in California. There are local programs that help pay for housing, and local governments also help pay for public infrastructure. We talked about bonds, and that's a way for governments to borrow money and raise money quickly. So for cities, counties, and special districts, bonds paid for by increased property taxes typically require a 2/3 approval by local voters. And those are called general obligation bonds. So I want to make this distinguishment because this is not talking about a bond. It is talking about the process to have a bond approved when it is going to require an increase in property taxes. Okay. So I want to make sure that distinction is clear for everyone. And so currently we talked about we have a 2/3 voter approval requirement. This proposition wants to lower that requirement to 55%. Okay. And what they're saying is historically, if they looked at measures they tried to pass that would cause an increase in property taxes, they could not get it to pass with a 66.7% rate. But if they were to have a 55% approval rating, those measures would have passed. And if they are able to do this, it would also require specific oversight activities. They would have to monitor the use of bond funds for supporting housing assistance and public infrastructure. And so basically, this will make it easier for them to pass general obligation bonds for housing assistance and public infrastructure. And overall, what we're saying is that the increase in the approval of local bonds could increase funding available for housing assistance and public infrastructure, but the overall amount on this is not clear. One other caveat with this is when we think about affordable housing programs, housing assistance, I think a lot of times we think about overall projects, but that also includes first-time home buyer opportunities, right? So just make sure you're considering that. But when we talk about kind of what supporters are saying is that it would give local communities more tools to make housing affordable, and it will allow local voters to address community needs such as housing and safe streets. They've raised about $5.7 million there. And then opponents are saying that changing existing protections, it would change existing protections from high debt caused by bond issues in the California Constitution. And it also pushes the cost of infrastructure onto local governments and taxpayers. And there's been about 28.5 million raised. I want to highlight that this kind of shows you the level of controversy around the proposition because as we go through these propositions, you'll see the variance and how much was raised for and against, and I can kind of give you an idea of how important it is to certain groups of people. Okay, so again, a yes vote is saying, I am okay with decreasing the voter approval requirement to 55% for general obligation bonds. A no vote is saying, I want to keep it at 66.7 or 2/3 approval for voter approval for these bonds. Okay, so just keep in mind again, general obligation bond is paid for through an increase in property taxes. All right. Prop 6, end enforced labor of people in jails and prisons. So this would eliminate the constitutional provision that allows involuntary servitude for incarcerated persons. This was put on by the state legislature. And what we're asking is, shall involuntary servitude for any reason, including as punishment for a crime, be prohibited in the state of California? Okay. So over the past few years, there's been voters in various states that have removed involuntary servitude language from their state constitutions. This proposal would allow the Organization Over Prisons to reduce prison time for people who voluntarily accept work assignments, but it would eliminate the ability for them to require involuntary servitude for any reason. And it also prohibits them from disciplining people in prison who refuse a work assignment. From a fiscal effect aspect, it is uncertain at this time, and it's primarily because, okay, if we don't have the prisoners doing this work, who will do it, how much will it cost, things of that nature. And so the effect is unlikely to exceed tens of millions of dollars annually, and it really just depends on how work for people in state prison and county jail changes. And so if you are in favor of this, you are saying, yes, I want to prohibit involuntary work under all circumstances. A no argument would mean, yes, you're okay with involuntary work by prisoners. And supporters say that this restores human dignity by ending forced labor, which constitutes slavery and violates human rights. There's been about 800,000 raised on this. Opponents, there was no argument against this, and there's been no money raised in opposition of Proposition 6. Okay, so that is the end of the propositions that were put on by the state legislature. The remaining propositions that we cover this afternoon were placed on the ballot from signature gatherers. So we had people get enough signatures to put this on the ballot. Let's move on to Prop 32. This raises minimum wage. And the question is, should California raise its statewide minimum wage to $18 an hour by January 2nd, 2026, and then each year based on inflation? And so when you look at some of the language on this proposition, you may see that it is titled the Living Wage Act of 2022. That is because it failed to make it on the ballot in November 2022. So it was able to make it this round. I think last time they said they did not have enough signatures. All right, so this is kind of the situation. The state adjusts minimum wage every year based on inflation, unless it is negative or exceeds 3.5%. So if there is negative inflation in the year, then there will be no adjustment to minimum wage. If inflation is over 3.5%, 3.5% is the maximum adjustment for minimum wage that the state will do annually. Now, it does not preclude certain industries that have higher minimum wages, right? So one example is fast food. The current minimum wage is $20 an hour. Under this current proposal, in 2025, minimum wage would be different based on the number of employees, and 26 is the magic number for the number of employees. So if you have more than 26 employees, it would be $18 an hour. If you have 25 or less, it would be $17 an hour. Now, without this proposition, the minimum wage would be $16 adjusted for inflation, which people estimate it could be about $16.50. And with this proposition, as opposed to the inflation, the wages being adjusted for inflation annually, the inflation adjustment would be paused until 2027. And that's because there are tiered increases for 25 and 26 built into this proposition already. And so that's why we have this language of up through 2026. The overall fiscal impact of this would be higher wages for state and local employees, causing an increase in government costs. And so what they're saying is we have certain state, local government employees who are making minimum wage. And if this goes into effect, we'll be paying more for those employees. The other thing is revenues will likely decrease, and the alternative is that there could be a lower use of Medi-Cal and CalFresh, which could save hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So again, if you have people making more money per hour, the allowable opportunities under Medi-Cal and CalFresh may decrease, which would cause the state to have to spend less on those programs. So that's why that fiscal effect is being communicated. And so supporters for this proposition say that raising the minimum wage will improve the standard of living for millions of workers and promote economic fairness. There's been about 11.5 million raised. Opponents say that raising the minimum wage will hurt businesses, raise prices, and cause job losses. So the taxes may be raised if governments paid more wages, and there's been about 65,000 raised. That is Prop 32. Okay, Prop 33, local governments and rent control. This proposed law is called the Justice for Renters Act, and this expands local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. Essentially, the question you're asking yourself is, should the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995 be repealed so local governments can regulate rents? Okay. I don't know. I'm on Nextdoor all the time. There's a lot of confusion about this proposition. So hopefully I'm explaining this well enough for everybody to understand. So here's the situation. The state law currently prevents rent control on single-family homes and housing units built after early 1995. There are some cities that have rent control laws that limit how much landlords can increase rent. But as a result of Costa-Hawkins, you're not allowed to tell a landlord how much they can charge for a unit once it's vacated, right? So you can't tell the landlord how much they can charge for a new rental. This proposal would eliminate Costa-Hawkins, and it would allow the cities and counties to control rents for any housing. It would also prevent the state from taking future action to limit local rent control, okay? And so some people saying like, oh, this is getting rid of rent control or it's doing this. Essentially, it is eliminating Costa-Hawkins, which had some limitations on how cities and counties could implement rent control. So it would eliminate those limitations for the cities and counties. That's what would happen if Prop 33 passes and Costa-Hawkins Act is repealed. And so the overall effects on this, there will be effects on renters and landlords. There could be reduced local property tax revenues, increased local government costs to carry out the laws. And it really depends on how many cities and counties pass rent control laws and what landlords do. And so for Prop 33, supporters say that it will allow local governments to protect renters, and local voters will be able to decide on whether and how to control rents. And there's been about 38 million raised on this in favor. Opponents say that Prop 33 will increase costs to build housing, therefore making the state's housing crisis worse, and it will drive up the cost for renters and home buyers. And there's been about 75 million raised on that. Okay, so I'm gonna go on to Prop 34. And this restricts spending of profits from selling prescription drugs. The question that we're asking is, shall certain healthcare providers lose their licenses and be banned from receiving government grants and contracts if they do not spend at least 98% of the money earned from the discounted sale, the federal discount, of prescription drugs on direct patient care? I'm going to be honest and tell you this one is a little convoluted for me, and I have been doing my best to explain this. It's working out so far, so let's see. Now, when thinking about just a little bit of background on this, Medi-Cal pays for prescription drugs for low-income people, and Medi-Cal has a new approach in how they pay for these drugs that's currently not in the state law. And they're using this single pay approach. And the argument is that a single approach likely saves the state money due to more discounted prices. Now, there's the federal program that provides discounts to certain healthcare providers who earn revenue from these federal discounts. The proposal on this is to restrict how certain entities spend revenue from these federal discounts. And they're saying 98% has to be spent on healthcare services provided directly to patients. Now, it only qualifies for certain types of entities. And I am going to read this directly because I don't want to make a mistake on this. Because what you have to ask yourself is who's being restricted by this proposition, basically. And this is on page 47 in the voter guide. And it basically says that if the entity participates in the federal drug discount program, has or has ever had a license in California to operate as a health plan, pharmacy, or clinic, and or has or had certain contracts with Medi-Cal or Medicare, has a 10-year period where it spent more than $100 million on purposes other than direct patient care, and owns and operates or has previously owned and operated multifamily housing units with at least 500 violations and a severity level of high. And the reason I wanted to read that is because those are the only healthcare entities that would be impacted by this proposition. And so you have to ask yourself again, do I want these healthcare entities to be limited on where they're able to spend their money? If they don't spend their money in that place, am I comfortable with them having their license removed and other penalties being impacted? In addition, with Prop 34, it would put the current Medi-Cal single pay approach into state law. So those are the two things that would occur with this proposition. And in terms of fiscal effects, it's saying it could be in the millions to identify and punish providers who violate the law. And fines could be imposed on those providers, which may provide some offsetting from that. Okay, so we talked about kind of what a yes vote says. Yes, I want this to happen. No, I don't want it to happen. Supporters say it'll ensure the money from those discounted drug programs are used for direct patient health care, and it will make the discount program permanent. There's been about 30 million raised in support. The opposition says this proposition targets one healthcare provider that supports rent control, and that federal law allows profits from drugs discounts to support any nonprofit mission on healthcare providers. And there's been about 5.7 million raised in opposition. Okay, let's move on to Prop 35. Permanent taxes support Medi-Cal. So this proposition will provide permanent funding for Medi-Cal healthcare services. And the question we're asking is, should we make permanent an existing tax on managed healthcare plans to provide ongoing funding for Medi-Cal and other healthcare services? So right now, the state charges a specific tax on health plans, and the charges are based on the number of people they provide coverage, including those in Medi-Cal. And the state uses that tax for two purposes. It helps to pay existing costs in Medi-Cal, and it helps to increase funding for Medi-Cal and other health programs. But currently, that tax is temporary, and it will end in 2026 unless the legislature and federal government approve it again. So this proposal will make the existing tax permanent beginning in 2027, and it will also create rules on how the state uses the tax revenue. So from an overall fiscal effect, it can increase $2 to $5 billion a year in funding for Medi-Cal and other health programs. And it will also cover additional costs that are not already included in Prop 35. And so supporters for this say that it will support health services and improve access to doctors that help low-income people. About 49 million has been raised in favor. There have been no arguments or money raised in opposition for Prop 35. Okay, let's go on to Prop 36. Prop 36, increased penalties for theft and drug crimes. The question we're asking here is, shall some misdemeanor theft and drug crimes be turned into felonies with sentences lengthened and or served in prison instead of jail? And so when we're talking about what type of misdemeanor theft, drug crimes that would turn into felonies, and it's for thefts under $950 if the defendant has 2 prior drug or theft convictions. And it's also felonies for possessing certain drugs, okay? And so currently, felonies are considered severe crimes. Less severe crimes are considered misdemeanors. And if you recall, Prop 47 reduced punishments. I can't remember what year it was, but that converted some felonies to misdemeanors. And what Prop 36 is trying to do is change it again to make some misdemeanors felonies again. And so from Prop 47, they say, hey, money was saved from fewer people in prison, and it was being used for mental health and drug treatment, programs to keep kids in school, and victim services. For this proposal, again, it'll turn some misdemeanors into felonies. It can lengthen sentences and requires some sentences to be served in prison instead of jail. It will also create a new court process for some drug possessions where that would be a treatment mandated felony versus jail, prison, or probation. And so just so you have an example of this, if someone has 2 past theft convictions and they shoplift items that are worth $950 or less, they could get a 3-year felony sentence. Another example is someone who gives or sells an illegal drug to someone who suffers a major injury from using that drug. They could receive a longer sentence. And if you had a prior drug conviction and you are found to be in possession of fentanyl or cocaine, you could be charged with a felony. Or you could be required to receive treatment and have the charges dismissed once you complete that treatment. And so this will also, if the treatment isn't completed or you aren't eligible, you could also be sent to jail. And so again, when we look at the fiscal effects of this, it could increase state local costs for prisons and jails and mental health and drug treatment, likely between tens of millions to low hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Supporters for this proposition say that it makes communities safer by holding repeat thieves accountable and making thieves and drug dealers serve tougher sentences. There's been 13.2 million raised. Those in opposition say it would make California less safe by stopping crime prevention and drug treatment programs, and it would cost taxpayers billions of dollars. Okay, so those are the 10 state measures. And I want to just say thank you. I am going to stop sharing in order to see if we have any questions. I know we only have like 10 minutes. I moved as quickly as I could through that. So Justin, Jacqueline, I'll turn it back over to you for now.
Yeah, thank you so much, British. Let's give her a virtual round of applause for covering all of our state ballot measures for today. It is greatly appreciated. We do have 3 questions tied to Prop 4, 5, and 33. So I'm gonna see if I can or I'll actually ask them for the one. Prop 4 was which was one on climate change. Olivia's question was, do they state what is disadvantaged communities?
Yes. So within the text for that proposition, they have a formal definition for disadvantaged communities and vulnerable communities. And so I'll put it in the chat just so I don't have to speak on it. I'll put it in the chat for you, but that is outlined. Again, that voter information guide, it has the full text for the propositions. And so you can look up the definitions there. So let me pull that up.
And let me know I can ask
No,
the
you
next
can,
question.
yeah, you can go on to the next question.
Okay,
I'm just
okay,
pull up
perfect.
the definition.
Perfect. Yeah, and so the next question is on Prop 5, and it's from Gloria. And the question is, so it's mostly for renters, and homeowners will pay higher property taxes.
Potentially. The reason I say potentially is what that would do is allow the cities and counties to implement stricter rent control if they want to, right? There's no direct impact right now outside of removing that Costa-Hawkins Act. Am I talking about the right proposition? I got some of these all in my head. But yeah, it's a potential. It's a potential. It's not definite. But no, I'm sorry. Prop 5 is lowering the voter approval requirement. And so for that one, that is still potential, right? Yeah, because it could, if a proposition is presented to the voters and it passes, again, it has a lower threshold for passing. That's what changes. So it just depends. It just depends on if it passes and it's able to get 55% approval and it causes the increase, then yes, it would.
Thank you. And then this last question is actually on Prop 33 around the local rent control. And Sean asks, so it allows local rent control by limiting state rent control? Is that it?
No, it eliminates the ability for the state to put limitations on local governments in establishing stricter rent control. Is that clear? Because I know it seems, and I will say these propositions are probably some of the more clear propositions we've seen on the ballot where they're not contingent upon something else passing or not passing. But essentially what it says is the state can no longer restrict cities and counties from applying stricter rent control if they want to. That's essentially what would happen with this. Valerie, I see you're coming on video. Do you want to add anything? Valerie is also with League of Women Voters and she's listening in today. So, okay, maybe not. All right. Any other questions on that?
Yep, I think we covered all the questions.
Okay, I'm gonna put the disadvantage definitions in here.
And while you're putting that in, because I know this is definitely a question I know is being asked, we are definitely going to be sending this recording out. I know we weren't able maybe to take all the good notes, on everything, but this is going to be sent out very soon, so that, as we're filling out our ballots, we're making informed decisions. Again, we thank British on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Greater LA for coming and breaking down these state ballot propositions, because if you're like anything like me, these can be very confusing, especially as the language is presented to us. And so it's always really good to be able to understand what does it mean if I say yes for this, and what does it mean if I say no for this proposition. So British, we want to thank you again. I don't know if you had any closing comments, but we want to transition over to something different before we close out, but just want to give you the floor if you had any closing comments.
No, I really just want to thank everybody for attending and for your participation today. The League of Women Voters is always here as a place of service to help inform voters. So if you do need more information, Vote 411 is an excellent resource and website. It's vote411.org. So it's not just propositions, but also information on the candidates. Check that out. Reach out to the League if you have any other questions or you want to join and participate. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much again, British. We appreciate you. Virtual hand clap for that again. It's greatly appreciated. So I know, folks, we got a couple more minutes, but I want to pass it over to Jacqueline. I know we had a great number of folks on. So before you log off, we do want to just talk about our Community Voices program very briefly, and just share what it's about. So if any of us on this call may not know about Community Voices, our advocacy program, you can learn a little bit more about it, and then we'll close out for the day. So I'll pass over to Jacqueline as I begin to share screen.
Awesome. Thank you again, British. We really appreciate your time and insight here. And thank you everybody for being here. So Community Voices is a program we have with Crystal Stairs. It's about 20 years old, actually started by who is now Supervisor Holly Mitchell. And it began as a place to create a platform, a space where parents, providers, staff members, people close to the early care and education space, and community partners and stakeholders could learn how to share stories effectively and get access to our legislators, and really learn how to take the lessons that we learn in this space, in the safe space, and take it into everybody's individual lives, into your own communities. And, take a look at this. We've got some photos up of these wonderful families and our staff and providers, because the reason we do this is for you, for every single person on the Zoom. This is why we have this program. This is why we have webinars like this. It's to educate everybody, to empower everybody, and to really advocate for what matters. And so what we do is we have in-person trainings where we'll learn how to share stories, how to work on public speaking. So if you've ever been to a Toastmasters, it's not quite like that, but it's that same feeling where we're going to start bringing in programs where we can learn how to use our voice. Maybe it's uncomfortable for you and you can challenge yourself a little bit. You can find your place in advocacy. Maybe you're not comfortable with public speaking, but there are ways that you can write, you can call, you can encourage your community to get involved. When we talk about empowering people, it really is truly supposed to be a safe and comfortable space for you to explore what your strengths are. Challenge yourself with some of the things that you want to work on. And because Crystal Stairs serves South LA, we do Long Beach and Gardena and Hawthorne, Inglewood and Linwood. It really is a place where community members can get together and usually have similar challenges that we want to advocate for. We are an LA County-based program, so we also bring in ambassadors from other sister organizations who do similar and like-minded work. And then we really push everybody to advocate. It might be like a postcard writing party. It might be asking you to send an email. It might be, as we did in June, get 44 plus of you up on a plane to Sacramento to have over 30 legislative meetings with our elected officials at the Capitol and to make sure that our budgets aren't cut. So it is a vast program. You are welcome to participate at your comfort level. We want everybody, including community members. So even if you do not receive subsidy from Crystal Stairs, if you are not a Head Start member, if you are not a provider, but you are a community member and you feel very passionate about the early care and education system, we want you to be a part of our team. So membership is free. When we say that you're a member, it just means that you get first notification of any local advocacy trips that we're doing. If we have limited space in certain trainings, we will let our members know first, and then we will open it up to the community. And really, it's just a wonderful space where you can network, get to know like-minded people, and take away lessons where you help us in promoting and advancing the early care and education space, but also you take those lessons away with you and you apply it to your own personal life. You will learn how to effectively communicate to your council member, to your senator, to your assembly member, and get the things done for you and your community that you need to. So I love Community Voices, and I hope that if you are not already a member, you will join us. And Justin and I are always around to answer any questions that you have. Either, we're running all the time here, but you can always email us as well, and we'll send out the information with the recording.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Jacqueline. And that leads us to our last slide. This concludes our civic engagement series. If you weren't on for September, I know I saw some familiar faces that may have been on our September webinar where we talked about voter registration and just all the, need to know things that you need to know in terms of when you cast your ballot, tracking your ballot, so on and so forth, that we did in partnership with the LA County Registrar Recorder's Office. And today, again, we want to thank British from the League of Women Voters for coming and talking about our state propositions. And this is what we do in Community Voices. We are always talking about definitely doing our advocacy on behalf of early education and childcare, but we want to make sure we have an informed community overall. And so this is doing our part here at Crystal Stairs at Community Voices and making sure that our community is civically engaged and civically educated, because we need to make sure we're making informed decisions by November 5th and beyond. So again, we want to thank you all for participating. You see there's a QR code there. My call to action, as I always say, as we end these webinars, I have two of them this time. One is to make sure if you're not a Community Voices member, go ahead and use that QR code and sign up through our job form. Also, you can reach out to us via email if you have any questions. And then lastly, as soon as we send this email out, our recap email with the recording of this webinar, even as you need to process the information yourself, because it was a lot, but it was a lot of great information. My call to action for you all is to make sure you're forwarding this recording out to family, friends, folks you know in the community, colleagues at work, because we all need to do our part to make sure that we're also not only educating ourselves, but we're making sure our community is educated. So again, thank you all for your time. You enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.